Honestly guys, this is a case I really wanted to love, and I've always been a little bit of a Be Quiet fanboy, pun intended. But the Pure Base 500FX comes in at £125 or about $130 in the US, and it's really hard to make a lot of compelling reasons for you to part with your money and purchase this case other than the fact it's got some nice RGB lights and some high quality fans. This case really is the complete opposite of most cases in this price bracket. A lot of case manufacturers usually equip their cases with their lower to mid-tier fans. Be Quiet only makes one ARGB fan, and it's a high quality expensive Lightwings fan. Companies like NZXT or Corsair or Antec will choose lower quality random ARGB fans to help bump up the price or justify the cost of a case. With Be Quiet, it feels like they've got no choice but to bump up the price of the case based purely on the fact that the Lightwings fans are so pricey. The Pure Base 500FX comes equipped with 3 120mm fans at the front and a 140mm fan at the rear for exhaust. I have no idea why. That could have quite easily been a 120 and I think anybody would have batted an eyelid. But, you know, it's always good to see better, isn't it really? As a result, the cheapest price I could find to buy these fans on their own was £78 in the UK and $109 in the US. So in the US, that works out to be 85% of the total price of the case. So in theory, you're buying 4 fans for $109 and getting a case thrown in for an extra $20. When you think of it that way, actually sounds pretty fantastic. But if you're not that bothered about the quality of fans and would prefer a high quality case with the option to buy high quality fans if you want or need them, then this case might not be the one for you. You can still buy the Pure Base 500DX, which is about £20 to £30 or dollars cheaper, and includes 3 Pure Wings 2 140mm fans, which is probably more than enough for most people, especially as the case already has plenty of RGB on the front and even a subtle little RGB strip along the roof of the case, which you can see reflected on your fans or radiator. A nice little touch. The Pure Wings 2 fans though are not as good at cooling as the Lightwings fans, and obviously don't have the all-important RGB flare, a little less panache. Seems to be my new favourite word. Now usually I don't spend the majority of the beginning of the video talking about fans. Actually sometimes I do. And whether they're good or just e-waste. It's because there aren't a lot of other positives to talk about when it comes to the Pure Base 500FX, other than great fans, some RGB lights, and a nice acoustically treated side panel. I always love to see these, by the way. The case itself is extremely underwhelming, and I think I can describe this case in basically one sentence. This is a high-end case with a high-end price, which doesn't prioritize high-end hardware in 2024. Now, that's not to say that the 500FX can't support high-end hardware. There's just a few things I'd recommend that you do before you start your build in this case to make your life much easier and avoid several mistakes whilst trying to build inside this thing like I did. But first things first, we've got to take a walk around the exterior of the 500FX, as the way a case looks is arguably the most important part. And honestly, there's a lot of really good things to appreciate about what Be Quiet have done here. I guess we have to talk about the front panel first, as those 2 Knight Rider style strips on the front really are the main focal point of the case. I never really watched Knight Rider as a kid, but I feel like I'm definitely showing my age just by knowing what it is now. Personally though, I think the lights look great. They're nicely diffused and they only require some contact pins on the front of the case and front panel to actually work. No cables are hanging off when you remove the front panel, which is always a bonus. Honestly, I would have preferred if the lighting was on the sides of the front panel opposed to right in the center, as it's just going to do nothing but restrict the airflow for those fans. You probably wouldn't get those same Knight Rider vibes, but you'd be getting much better performance, so I would have preferred if that was the priority. Something more like the recently released Dark Base 701, which does exactly what I would have preferred. Removing that front panel though isn't as easy as you might think. It required an obscene amount of effort to pry this thing off the chassis, and you're stuck in this weird middle ground. Am I pulling too hard that I could snap the clips off holding this thing on? Or am I a weak little baby and just not pulling hard enough? And this case can absolutely take the abuse. It's a far cry from the nice little push pegs you see on the Corsair 4000D Airflow. Feel free to check out that full review in the corner of your screen. Once you're actually done battling with your inner demons and the Pure Base 500FX to remove the front panel, it reveals a magnetic dust filter underneath which covers the 3 intake fans, as well as giving you a better look at those ARGB contacts. Here's a little spoiler for later in the video, just go ahead and remove that dust filter. It's not really needed and just impedes the airflow of the fans even more. Speaking of dust filters, there's a full length one at the bottom for the PSU, which removes nice and easily from the front. Then there's another on the top of the case with a Be Quiet logo and a nice little notch at the back to remove it nice and easily. It's held in place with 4 really strong magnets in each corner and has a nice little plastic frame to give it some added rigidity. Unfortunately though, this is where the case starts to show its age a little bit. That tempered glass side panel is held in place with 4 thumb screws, so you have to be ready to catch it once you remove that last one. This is probably one of my biggest problems with the 500FX, as this kind of mounting for the TG just makes it feel so cheap. It's literally what you expect to find in a case costing around £30, not 130. The 500FX was released in August 2022, around 2 years after the Corsair 4000D Airflow was launched. And for a case from September 2020, that looks and feels so much more natural to work with and a lot better thought out. As far as I/O is concerned, you get one USB Type-A port and one USB Type-C port, separate jacks for the microphone and headphones, a nice clicky power button, and another button for cycling the RGB on the case. One issue that I had though is that I couldn't actually plug in the USB 3 cable into my system, as the cable bar that hides your cables conflicts with the placement of the USB 3 header on my motherboard. Obviously that's not going to be a problem for everyone, but it was one for me. Basically, if it has to plug in sideways like mine, you're going to want some kind of adapter, or remove the cable bar, or you have a higher end motherboard with multiple USB 3 headers. So if you've made it this far into the video, feel free to click that like button down below and get yourself subscribed. I've also enabled channel memberships as well if you want to help me out and allow me more time to make these kind of videos. Thank you for your time. Now back to the 500FX. By removing the side panels, we can have a look inside and see what £130 gets you. Inside we can get a better look at those Lightwings fans, especially that 140mm, which feels enormous in a more compact case like this. In fact, it's a tiny bit too big that I had to remove it just in order to squeeze my motherboard underneath it. Of course, I did try several times before eventually removing the fan, and as a result I did actually scratch the cable bar a little bit with the underside of my motherboard. Something I was really disappointed by, and I feel like a 120 in the rear just would have been fine. It didn't need to be a 140 and could have maybe shaved a little bit of money off the case as well. Ultimately, I guess I could have just been a little bit less stubborn and just removed the fan, or perhaps even easier, removed the cable bar on the right hand side, which was preventing me from just sliding my motherboard under the fan in the first place. In the end, it doesn't really matter as my GPU covers up the scuff mark anyway, but I'd recommend to any viewers that you remove the fan or cable bar before installing your motherboard. Then above the pierce chute, there's no mounting options for fans or drives. Just plenty of mesh to allow for that air to naturally rise up through the case. The front I/O cables are all black, though the connections for the power button and hard drive LEDs are the traditional, more fiddly connectors. As soon as cases leave these behind for good, I'll be very happy. As far as compatibility is concerned, let's quickly run down the numbers behind the Pure Base 500FX. At the front, you can fit up to 3 120 or 2 140mm fans. Up top, it's either 2 120 or 2 140mm fans. Then the rear can obviously take a 120 or 140mm fan, resulting in a maximum of 6 fans in total. Radiator support is a little bit different. You can get up to a 360 or 280mm rad at the front, a 140mm rad at the rear, and only a 240mm radiator up top. If you opt for an air cooler, you can fit giant tower coolers up to 190mm in height, so any of Be Quiet's biggest coolers will fit in here with no problem if you want to match the aesthetic. Then the maximum GPU length is 369mm, so you should comfortably be able to fit most newer, larger GPUs, assuming you don't have a radiator mounted at the front. The maximum power supply length is 258mm with the hard drive cage installed, and 365mm if you don't install a radiator at the front and remove the cage. The included hard drive cage doesn't have any sleds you can slide in and out, so you will have to remove the entire cage and screw your drives in from the side. You can fit 2 3.5-inch drives in there and comfortably fit 5 2.5-inch SSDs inside the 500FX. Though cable managing all of those drives, that would be another deal. So let's talk cable management. And things actually start off pretty strong for the 500FX. Like I mentioned earlier, on the solid side panel you do actually get some insulating foam to help reduce a little bit of that noise and vibrations just from the system. It has captive thumb screws, and also replacing the panel after your system is built, it's just super easy and it doesn't snag on any of the cables. Always a big bonus. Around this side though, you can see the cable bar is removable. It's held in place with a single thumb screw, so that's actually super convenient. It's also got this little plastic logo piece in the middle which you can use to hide cables that are coming into your potential SSD or hard drives that you might want to mount on the side here. The hard drive cage is also easily removed with a couple thumb screws, but if you don't plan on installing a radiator at the front of the case, I'd honestly just leave it where it is. I did originally use some cable extensions when building this system, but I couldn't find a neat way to run them from the big void left by the cage at the front. So I thought it looked much cleaner if that space was just filled and you can just easily stuff the cables inside that thing anyway. Considering the basement is basically just a giant mesh pattern, a neat cutout for some GPU cables to poke through would have been a nice touch here. But when it comes to the main bulk of your cables, you will be fighting for some of that space with the included fan hub. When I checked out the Montec King 95 a few weeks ago, I really appreciated their placement of the fan hub, high up in the corner, out of the way of your main run, and I'd love to see more companies take this approach with their included fan hubs, as there's no reason for the fan and ARGB hub to be right in the center, taking up most of your cable management space. For the majority of your cables, there's plenty of cable tie down points and 4 Velcro ties included, and if you skip cable extensions, you have an even tidier rear panel than I do. It's honestly fine, it's just a little underwhelming, but it works and there's plenty of width behind the motherboard, so you should have no issues just getting the back panel on. And I guess it was pretty quick and easy, so for some people, that's absolutely enough. I just like the little extra things. I like little bonus clips and little flaps. And before we talk about the thermals, I'll quickly talk about the overall building experience and any quick tips. My first point is obviously going to be about regarding the removal of that rear fan or cable bar. 100% do this before you try to squeeze a modern motherboard inside this thing. If you are using a modular power supply, plug in your 8-pin EPS power connectors before the radiator, as well as any fans or RGB connectors. Basically just plug in everything above the RAM, as you won't be able to do it later without removing the radiator. I obviously found this out the hard way. Everything else is actually pretty straightforward. As all the fans are pre-wired into the hub, you just need to connect the SATA for power, and then the 5-pin ARGB to your motherboard, if you want to control it with your motherboard software, that is. And obviously last is the PWM cable to a fan header, so you can control the fan speed of the fans. Thermals. This is where I expected great things. 4 pre-installed Be Quiet fans, plus a 240 up top, I was expecting this thing to be fantastic. But rather annoyingly, it really wasn't. First things first, in the default state, our CPU tops out at 78.4 degrees. Not bad, but not great. Remember that dust filter I mentioned earlier? Well, if you do remove that, that can bring down your maximum temperatures by over 3 degrees. Though that might include some bonus cleaning for you further down the line. Removing the entire front panel drops us down to 73.8 degrees, another decent decrease. Then if you remove the dust filter up top, we're hitting 71.3 degrees. You might think that's all a little bit pointless. Who's going to use a case like this? Well, the way I see it is that if you remove the panels and filters and your temps barely change, then you know the case has good proper ventilation. I slated the Corsair 3000D for a lot of things, but the temperature changes when removing the panels are minimal. About 2 degrees difference from the best case to worst case. Whereas here, we're looking at just over 7 degrees from the default state. That's a big difference. As far as the GPU is concerned, it's more of the same, though not quite as dramatic. In the default state, we topped out at 64.8 degrees, and as we gradually removed filters and panels, we dropped all the way down to 60.5 degrees. Compared to the cases I've recently tested, it doesn't look great for the 500FX. It's completely middle of the road or near the bottom. The NZXT H5 Flow and Corsair 4000D, with just 2 basic fans installed, outperformed it. And a case that I absolutely slated, the Corsair 3000D RGB wipes the floor with the 500FX. If you compare the 3000D RGB to this case, the Corsair case looks like a good deal, but it isn't. And you should remember, just buy a 4000D airflow and add some of your own fans. You'll be much happier. Even if you just buy the same fans from the 3000D and put them in the 4000D. Much better. But there's one thing that this case does really well, perhaps better than any other case I've tested, and one for me that's almost impossible to consistently test well, and of course, that's noise levels. I'd love to be able to do some more noise normalized testing in the future, but in my current setup being a studio in the garden, I can't quite do that. But this PC is so quiet at idle that I had to replace the original power supply I was using as it didn't have a 0 RPM mode, and it was louder than everything else in the system. This case won't top the charts for cooling performance or give you the lowest temperatures, but if you don't want to do the research to find the quietest, best performing fans, then this isn't a bad option. I'll give you guys a quick noise test at some different RPM levels for you to work it out. So to summarize, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but bear with me. My main editing PC I use daily is inside a Be Quiet Silent Bass 802. It's a monster of a case. Yes, it is much more expensive, currently available for about £190, but there's so much flexibility regarding front panels and top panels, and you can choose between solid or mesh, and it's all super easy to swap over with simple buttons and magnets. The side panel can be released with just the push of a button, not 4 stupid screws. It just feels like there was some proper German engineering involved in building and designing and making that case. the Pure Base 500FX really isn't anywhere near that level of customization or flexibility or even just raw physical materials and quality. I know that it's basically just a Pure Base 500 with some nice fans and a mesh panel, but it's still an expensive case and has to be treated that way. Though what you are getting if you do purchase this thing is one hell of a silent machine, and with some proper tuning and tweaking, it can be an incredibly silent machine whilst under loads as well. It won't be a chart topper, it won't even be the quietest or even the coolest, but it's a simple option if you've got a simple need. Silence without the hassle. Let's be honest, this is a pretty average looking case with a lot of missing features you'll find on similarly priced or even cheaper cases. But if you want your next PC case to just be quiet, then I guess it's not a bad option. It's just one that I find really hard to recommend, no matter how much the Be Quiet fanboy inside me wants to. Will you be disappointed by the 500FX? Probably not, especially if you're in the US and you just harvest it for fans, then just treat it as a $20 case. And for $20, it's pretty good. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of the video. What do you guys think? Have I been too harsh on the Pure Base 500FX? Have I completely missed the mark here? Please let me know down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your opinions. Alternatively, if you'd like me to check out any other good PC cases, please let me know in the comment section down below whilst you're there. I've got about 6 or 7 other cases either on their way to the studio or here right now. So if you have enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like. And if my face hasn't offended you, don't forget to get subscribed. If you're interested in checking out the Be Quiet Pure Base 500FX or any other cases I may have mentioned, make sure to check the description down below for my affiliate links. And if you want to support the channel directly, feel free to join up as a channel member. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Cheers.